Welcome. Ecuador will have an electoral process on February the 7th to elect a presidential binomial, 137 legislators and 5 anti-and parliamentarians, and everything indicates that the conditions and guarantees for the massive participation in the election depend largely on the security of each citizen and the conditions imposed by the National Electoral Council. The presence of hundreds of international observers and numerous news media also make this democratic event an event of international attention. We therefore ask ourselves, are the political, economic, logistical and operation conditions in place for more than 13 million Ecuadorians to exercise their right to vote? We want to talk to the President of the National Electoral Council, Diana Atamaint.
Bueno, de entrada preguntaría cómo ha sido el proceso, cómo lo evalúa, pues ha sido meses intensos con fines de...
How are you, Diana? Pleasure to have you on the program. How has the process been? It has been a tense month with the end of the year complicated with the pandemic issue. Well, in Ecuador, we know that the political pre-campaign, the registration of the candidacies, the pre-electoral year is intense. Ecuadorians are very committed, very effective with the political issue. But beyond this, unfortunately, affected by the pandemic, it has been a very big challenge for the electoral authorities to organize the elections with the reformed Code of Democracy, which for us was also another challenge. But with all these conditions, the political organizations have had wide participation, finding in the National Electoral Council a friendly ally institution to strengthen democracy. But there have been also difficulties in the economic order because the budget was reduced in this electoral process. The armed forces, as the Minister of Defense said, did not have the money in time to print the ballots. For example, why this was not coordinated before. Ecuador is going through, as many countries in the world, economic crisis, social crisis, health crisis, and this affects the electoral organization. We already planned a budget at the beginning of the year because an electoral process is not organized in 15 days, in 1 week, but at least 1 year in advance. And that was exactly how we proposed to the Ministry of Finance with all and each one of the items. But then we had to face the pandemic. We had to adjust the budget, putting the health and life of the Ecuadorians above the national interest. But unfortunately, we did not have the response in time from the Ministry of Finance, and remember that this is a very delicate issue for us, and I believe that the electoral officials should be given the credit they deserve because they have made efforts to comply with their work. We only received the budget allocation on November 20th, when we were about to carry out the election process. So these problems of financial nature, of resources to be able to exercise their right to vote, to guarantee the exercise of the vote, these were reduced where the minimum was affected or what was done before with the utmost was done with the minimum resources. Well, the reduction had to do a lot with the salaries of the officials, the instructors, the coordinators of the voting centers, and some activities in which we received the participation of state agencies that provide their services, whose costs were also substantially reduced. So what is going to happen next Sunday is covered. There are no deficiencies. There are no places without the basic elements for the process. With the economic limitations and the disbursement on time, unfortunately, in spite of that, we are ready to get to February the 7th with the ballots. With the logistics, then we will have to adjust accounts, of course, but, well, we are used to do that, but logistically we are fine, although the economic, well, then we will look at it later. The other question that worries Latin America that has to do with the 4 councillors is a possibility of a dismissal. The question is to what extent these internal disputes of this apparent confrontation between the National Electoral Council and the Election Disputes Tribunal has hindered your work. Well, unfortunately, there is a situation in which a political organization has tried to boycott an electoral process, where all the political organizations complied with an electoral calendar. I want to make emphasis on this. where all the political organizations complied with the electoral calendar, with the conditions of the regulations and the organ electoral law to reach these elections. Unfortunately, this has happened and has brought us difficulties in the organization process. However, I insist, once again, we are ready to get to February the 7th as planned in the electoral plan. If tomorrow it would occur to this court to replace you, what would happen with the process? Or after February the 7th and from February the 8th on, you could also be removed and everything comes to nothing. We are in a situation in which the resolution in the last instance is still pending, which is the plenary of the Election Disputes Tribunal. The possible removal of 4 councillors. This would mean, well, the people can say 4 main councillors leave and 4 substitutes enter, and the process continues. It is not like that, because a resolution is still in force in which Judge Torres, who has caused all this institutional crisis, is still pending. It's still pending that the whole process of qualification and inscription of candidacies would have to go back, so that a political organization, without having complied with the deadlines, incorporates other candidates in different positions, and in this way the elections would be suspended. We would not have elected authorities, and the time would not be enough to install them as required by the Constitution, which is on May 24, the President and Vice President, and on May 14th, the Andean Parliament and the National Assembly. There is another element, which is the public discussion around the role played by the National Electoral Council. It resolves around an issue which is a little sensitive and also neuralgic in the political key, and it has to do with the fact that some councillors respond more to their political organizations or to those who place them there. To what extent this condition or this political origin of some councillors has contaminated the work of the National Electoral Council. Well, I would not say that the people of the or the councillors who come from different political backgrounds have responded strictly to these circumstances or to the interest of a political party, beyond the differences that have been evident in the conformation of the plenary of the National Electoral Council. I believe that we all seek to carry out a transparent electoral process. Unfortunately, the differences have been shown in the media where very easily and with professionalism. It is necessary to accept that in a professional organization where there is a difference and where it is necessary to decide when a majority wins, it is necessary to respect it, even if one does not agree. Another element that calls the attention outside Ecuador is interesting, is that there are many candidates, 16 candidates for the presidency, more than 5,000 candidates between the representatives to the assembly from provincial, national, and Andean parliamentarians. This complicated the work. To what extent this excessive number possibly generates more difficulties? You will remember that the Ecuadorian Constitution determines that every political organization has to be reviewed and can be registered within the registration of political organizations from all levels, from parishes, cantons, provinces, and national character. We cannot cut the right of participation, and if the political organization complies, it has to be registered. These are the circumstances in which we find ourselves at this time. This is why the number of presidential candidates, and I think it is the first time that Ecuador lives this kind of circumstances. You will remember that in the previous process we had more than 80,000 candidates registered for local authorities. This is our reality, but in any case I think it is worth discussing and thinking about a constitutional reform or put in the law more rules or greater controls so that political organizations are strengthened and not so dispersed, because this is a topic for discussion. Is it more democracy to have more political organizations? Is it less democracy, greater rights of participation, and so on? It is an issue that is pending and should be addressed immediately. After the elections, I think the National Electoral Council has the responsibility, as well as the Ecuadorian society. To be stricter with the selection of candidacies would be the logical thing to do. I would rather say that because this is also goes through the rules of the Constitution, I would rather see in the survival or in the permanence of their legal status of the political organizations to comply with certain requirements. For example, the number of acquired supporters, for example, the positions that they can achieve. Paradoxically, with the reform of the Code of Democracy, now what it sought is alliances that strengthen the validity of political organizations. But paradoxically, as I was saying, now when there are those conditions and there are incentives for this to happen, there was greater fragmentation. So it deserves a discussion and look at what is happening in Ecuadorian politics. So with respect to that, there is an element that did call my attention. It is that despite the number of candidacies, the presence, for example, of social commitment of least 5 and social justice were not allowed at the corresponding time. These organizations that in some way represent or welcome two important political groups and strong leaderships were not evaluated in time. This also generates complications in the handling of the qualification right in the midst of the electoral process. These things are challenged. There is an electoral calendar that must be complied with, and we must abide by it. However, the National Electoral Council complies with all the processes that have to be carried out. But on this occasion, unfortunately, there were several circumstances, among them an audit by the Controller General of the state that questioned the legal recognition given to one or several political organizations, to 4 political organizations, exactly 4 political organizations. And that is what in a way also generated a complicated situation of political participation with their candidates. On the other hand, we complied with the constitutional mandate and the Code of Democracy to look at the validity or not, or the permanence of a political organization, but the Election Dispute Tribunal reversed our decision and took us again to reconsider what we had complied with following the guidelines of the regulations and the Code of Democracy, which also generated this expectation on whether or not to continue with the political participation of some organizations. So regarding the electoral process this Sunday, February the 7th, I would ask you directly, are the conditions given, are the guarantees given, are there basic conditions for the electoral process to take place within the established protocols without the possibility of even suspending it? This is a question that some international experts have even asked themselves. There are no conditions to suspend the elections or to stop holding them in the planned time. The conditions and the regulations and the protocols that we have implemented are being reviewed with the observation of the World Health Organization, with the national organizations, and with the experiences of other countries that in more complicated circumstances have held elections. Then we consider that this process of February the 7th, if all Ecuadorians comply with all the recommendations, the risk of contagion is substantially reduced. And this also seeks to have a greater degree of participation of people, to avoid absenteeism, but in any case we will be expecting that we go quietly. Unfortunately, it will not be a process of a joyful celebration, of much color, but rather a great prudence, but with responsibility to ensure the participation of Ecuadorians. Another characteristic that identifies Ecuadorians is that Ecuadorian citizens love these events. They like to go with the family, they go with their father, mother, grandmother. So there has been a culture that these are family events and they participate, and the question is, in the electoral board, in the electoral colleges, are there minimum conditions so that, for example, elderly people, people with handicaps, or people who it's not easy for them to exercise their right to vote have those conditions in their favor? We have effectively organized the electoral process in the most crowded polling stations to be divided. And this has increased the number of new polling stations to 611 nationwide in order to avoid crowds. We recommend that each voter to go alone if they do not need assistance. Obviously, in order to prevent people from gathering around or inside the polling stations. Secondly, we have agreed with the municipalities, with the local governments, that within their jurisdictions, the sale of products around the polling stations will be prohibited. And people with handicaps will have the possibility to do so as in other elections, now with even more responsibility. It is prohibited for them to stay inside the polling stations as it was before, talking, watching. Even the candidates have a limit of people who can accompany them, 8 companions, 2 photographers to record the event. They can take their own xerograph. The screens will be disinfected in every moment. All the recommendations that we have published are fundamental that they are complied with. So, to what extent that there are guarantees that at the moment of the counting, verification of the votes and proclamation of the results, the minimum or basic conditions of computer and technical security will be in place. Why do I say that? Because there is always a suspicion that the political actors can always raise the possibility of fraud. And some actors have said that the fraud is not precisely in the reception of votes, but in the counting at the polling stations. To what extent that these minimum technical and computer conditions are guaranteed? Once we went through the previous process, we identified some difficulties we had, especially in the publication of the results, but not in the vote counting process, and we accepted the recommendations of the international and national observers. We immediately set to work to change and modify those things that needed to be done, especially in the computer system, and for that we have had international assistance and cooperation. It is worth recognizing that the United Nations, the European Union, and other friendly countries, the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations, are accompanying us in this change of the computer system, looking at its vulnerabilities and adjustments, and our technicians have also done so. And in this way, we are now much better prepared to avoid any situation that could lead to doubts that the process is not transparent. But mainly, we have opened the possibility for international observers, national observers, delegates from the political organizations to be present. At this very moment, for example, there are auditors who are specialists from the political organizations who are watching from the inside, from up close, the whole process of organizing the elections. So we are showing transparency without confidentiality clauses. The information that people want, and as I said, there are international technicians who are now working within the National Electoral Council, helping to improve the computer system. We are convinced that we are ready and sure about mainly that the whole process will be respected. In the current conditions, at 5 p.m., there could be a result. So, for example, the companies that are authorized to do so, and the media also authorized to do so at 5 p.m. to give a result, they can give the result of what was collected during the electoral process. They have the rules and conditions that we set to be able to publish these results. What we ask is that we must be prudent. When these figures are very close between one candidate and another, we must be prudent because there is always a margin of error of plus minus 3%. More or less 3%. And we will also do the quick count, which we will also publish as long as it is not within this margin of error. We are going to publish it as the National Electoral Council, and we will publish it live and direct to publish the results of the quick count. We want the public to have the certainty and security, but the quick count is an official approximation that will be presented to the National Electoral Council or other companies. We want to be prudent, and what the National Electoral Council officially disseminates and publishes, because the count can often be recounted, there is the possibility of complaints. Those official results will be the ones that will be respected, and they are the ones that the people should expect. And please avoid false news, rumors, voice notes, etc., that do a lot of damage to the electoral process. Be informed through official channels of what the National Electoral Council disseminates. I have also spoken with some international observers, for example, Oscar Laborde, the head of the teleSUR mission. He said that it is better to wait than to regret, with results that do not correspond to reality, up to where there would be a margin of time to be able to make a public and official announcement that it is not necessary at 5 o'clock, which we can also wait 24 hours. Of course, we hope that by 7:30 at night, we will begin to publish the first results of the official count. We will begin with the president, members of the National Assembly, members of the provincial assemblies, and Andean parliamentarians. So it is better to follow this official information, to have an idea of what could happen. These are tendencies, these are approximations that the other companies can give us. It is true, I totally agree that until the voting is not officially closed, it is like a football match. Until the referee finishes it, we cannot say who the winner is officially and what will happen after the electoral process. Why elections are not going to be held in some countries? For example, as some political players have denounced that there are some countries where the consulates are not effectively guaranteeing the presence of Ecuadorian voters outside the country. There are some cases. In particular, it has been said that the one in Queens, for example, is not open for these and thousands of Ecuadorians that live there. Well, first, the Ecuadorian state proceeded to close some consulates. So we also had to reorganize the electoral centers abroad. So we do not have the capacity to set up in those countries where the consulates have already been closed, because it is very complicated to organize. What we have done is to create new electoral centers so that the people can go and vote. That is a condition. We would have to look at whether that is the condition of this situation. The second thing is that we have organized as much as possible, and the ballots are being sent abroad. They are 100% printed. They have already been sent in many of the cities, and there is no reason to limit the right to vote. But there is a condition that unfortunately is out of the hands of the National Electoral Council. For example, Italy, the measures that each government takes. That's right, there are curfews from 5 p.m. or there is a total confinement, so unfortunately we would not be able to get there in this situation. The capacity is a very complicated issue for us. In some cities, for example, only with the members of the polling stations, the capacity limit is met, and the voters will not be able to enter to vote. All these conditions will substantially affect the participation in these elections, unfortunately, for our citizens abroad. One thing that is very important, because it has come to our attention that some observers, presidents even denounced that the interference of the United States in the electoral process after the meeting of President Lenin Moreno with Almagro and other authorities. They say that in some way or another this could influence the behavior of the electoral process. They have the answer. The OAS is coming with a mission that will surely accompany us in the places where they decide with total independence. We will have a meeting on Wednesday to begin with. They even arrived in advance with computer technicians in electoral processes who participated in the simulations. In the last simulation, it fills us with great joy and confidence, because we are showing the world, the international observers, that there is nothing to hide. We trust we trust in the independence, the seriousness of all the international observers and the independent observers as well, that the doors has not been closed to anyone to watch. I am sure that on the 7th, the National Electoral Council will give its verdict, what the Ecuadorian people say, and I am sure that on the 7th, what the Ecuadorian people will say will be the verdict of the National Electoral Council. And a final question that may also be a little sensitive to the Latin American context: to what extent We can guarantee that, for example, Mr. Luis Almagro does not repeat what happened in Bolivia. That is, in the middle of the count, in the middle of the process of definition, he made a statement and generated what happened in Bolivia. Also a regrettable year, with dictatorship, with deaths, with massacre. Is it possible to talk about him not being included in these issues? Well, I believe that everyone has the right to express their opinion. We are in a democratic country that respects the opinion of all political players and the institutions that accompany us, but I consider that the decision and the final word is with the electoral authority, that at this moment is the highest national authority on issues of announcing results. We hope that this follow-up states what exactly happens, and I believe that there will be no major problems. I am convinced that the Ecuadorian people will go to the polls, and the obligations and responsibility of political organizations to make the control that corresponds to them by right will also serve us well. We in the National Electoral Council have no other commitment than with the country and with democracy to announce the results. We call on the citizens to participate in a respectful and joyful way. But from here, the most important thing is to wait for the official results and not get carried away by false news that unfortunately we see every day in social networks. It does not harm a candidate, it harms democracy, it harms legitimacy. We have to wait for this with caution. We will have to do it, but we are ready for the citizens. Hopefully, on the night of February the 7th, we will be able to see what has happened with the results and with a significant trend. How do you evaluate yourself in this electoral process, and especially taking into account that this historic electoral process can make a difference for the future? What is your personal evaluation of your performance, dear Diana? With many difficulties and with many things and with lessons learned, but with a clear conscience that everything that has to be done was done, and that I am committed to the country as I have always done. I will never let my political, professional, personal career be tarnished, including the values that my parents taught me. I can be questioned with many mistakes that I have possibly made because I am a human being, but I am always committed to the country, defending democracy, defending national unity, because I want to leave my children, I want to leave young people a legacy that when things are done transparently, there is no need to fear for anything in politics, for example, in the persecution that one can be the victim of at any given moment. I think it has been a very hard period, and I would have preferred to be in another period, and to go through this transition is very complicated. I think that it has not been easy for any authority in this time of economic, social, and health crisis. But women know how to do it, and I will do it very well. One word, what is Diana's greatest learning experience as President of the National Electoral Council? The important thing is to defend the truth at this moment, to defend democracy at all cost. That is why we said, and I say we, always speaking as an institution, the elections have to be held, and they will be held on February the 7th. Thanks to Diana Atamaint, President of the National Electoral Council, who has been kind enough to come to the teleSUR studio to talk about what this historic event will mean for Ecuadorians and for Latin America, the elections on February the 7th, for which we will also be doing special coverage here on teleSUR, the news channel of Latin America and the Caribbean. We say goodbye. Take care. Bye.